Do you think you come from a dysfunctional family? Well, you might want to think again after today's lesson, because we are going to see dysfunction at its finest. But we're going to see that God uses this dysfunction to actually build the nation of Israel. Join us today. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Genesis series. Very, very glad you're joining us today. I have to tell you, for those of you that know me, you'll find this kind of funny. Last week after Bible study, what I did was I went to get a massage. And the reason for it is because it's Christmas time and I decided to climb up a ladder. And then when I was climbing down the ladder, I missed the last step, literally fell off the ladder. Thought I had a lot more padding on my back end than apparently I do. So I thought I would go and get a massage. So when I was laying on the table, the therapist, I told her about it. The therapist said, well, before we're done today, I'm going to stretch out your neck. Okay. And I'm laying on the table and all I could think about was this picture. This is me before the massage. Okay. There you go. Then this is me after the massage. I don't know why I thought that was so funny. So there you go. All right, we are videotaping this. This is for if you're watching us normally. This is our last lesson for 2022. And we're going to be taking a long 5-week break. During this 5-week break, we're going to be showing you our End Times Timeline Conference with Joel Richardson. So every Wednesday morning, we'll have one of the sessions up instead of a Genesis. We're taking 5 weeks off, not because I want to, but Rio Vista, the place where we videotape everything, or where we actually have our live Bible study, is closing down for 2 of the 5 weeks, and that's in the middle of January. So we're taking a long 5-week break, but you will have something new every Wednesday morning and every Monday morning because we're doing Psalms. So you'll have lots of stuff to watch while we're gone. Since it's 2 weeks from Christmas, I thought it would be fun to show a Skit Guys video. They're really funny. They make us laugh. And we're going to play this for you. And it does actually have a really good message. So watch this.
Hey, Ed, come check out my North Star Christmas tree topper. It levitates.
Is this a gummy bear?
Yeah, we lost baby Jesus. Hey, check out these LED lights. I have them synced up to a 76-hour all-Christmas music playlist.
There's my little Christmas DJ.
Ow.
So, are you waiting till Christmas is over so you can go buy a new nativity set when they're on sale?
Huh? No. We lost baby Jesus like 11 years ago.
Is baby Jesus always a gummy bear?
Oh, no. We trade it out every year. Yeah, like last year it was a tiny troll doll. And the year before that we used a dog treat. They were the perfect size, but Dalton kept taking them and eating them.
You mean your dog kept stealing them?
No, my son Dalton, he loves those dog treats. Especially the peanut butter ones. There was one year that we used a doll head. That was creepy. We made a modeling clay baby Jesus. So the dog took that one too. One year we got desperate and used an ice cube. That was a miss and a mess. Yeah, just seems like everything we try to replace baby Jesus with never lasts.
Say that again.
Everything we try to replace baby Jesus with never seems to last.
And
what?
say it again, slowly.
Why?
Just do it, dulcimo, slowly, do it.
I don't understand what's happening.
Just do it.
This is getting weird. Say it! Fine. But when I'm done saying this, you're gonna march in here and you're gonna watch my star levitate.
Fine, do it.
Fine. Everything we try to replace baby Jesus with never seems to, oh, yep, there it is. Okay. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
I thought that was a really, really good message. One that's not just for Christmas, but for the entire year. That really we need to make Jesus, nothing's going to satisfy us in life except him. So once we realize that, it could actually be life-changing. So, all right, that is a really good video compared to what I'm about ready to play for you. Because I want to play you a video that pretty much depicts what our lesson looks like today. And the problem is that you expect what's on this video out of, some sects of Mormonism, all right? But you don't expect this from the Bible. Especially when we're dealing with God building this whole entire nation of Israel. And yet, today, this story is going to feel a lot like this particular video. So, watch this.
I like marriage, and I'm a repeat offender, so I have adopted a faith that embraces that lifestyle. In fact, it recommends it, and like to reward good behavior. So if you're good with one marriage, they figure you'll be good with two. I hope they think I'll be good with four. Let's go ahead and go home, and you can meet my family. They're special, and you'll like them. And I'm excited about introducing you to them. Hey, you going to come say hi to me? Have you got a big kiss for me? Where's my big kiss? Oh, you've been playing in water, haven't you? How's it going, son? What'd you do today?
Stubbed my toe.
You did? This is Janelle. We don't really use an order, but if you're questioning the order of how family came together, she's number 2. Okay, hi. How's it going? Oh, shoot. This is Mary's house. She's got a kitchen and then all of her rooms, and she's this level. How's it going?
Very good.
How was your day?
Very good.
My day was really quite nice.
Good.
So this is my daughter Mariah. Hi, sweetheart. How's it going? Hey. That's Peyton. Is your mom coming over?
I don't know.
Okay, let's go downstairs. This is my wife, Christine.
Hi. Good.
Should we introduce her?
Yes.
This is Truly, our little girl, soon to come. Truly is actually going to be number 13. 20 years ago, I married Mary, and then 17 years ago, I married Janelle, and then 16 years ago, I married Christine. I just fell in love, and then I fell in love again, and then I fell in love again.
All right, I always laugh at that video because the first wife, when he walks in, looks like she wants to basically punch her husband in the face. Because that is just dysfunction. I'm sorry. There's nothing good, nothing normal, nothing right about that. So anyway, apparently the difference between the video we just saw with Cody is that Cody apparently fell in love over and over and over again, and he married lots of women. But today, we're at a place where we're going to see Jacob. And Jacob is going to have a lot of wives, not out of choice, but he doesn't love women over and over and over again. He loves one woman. But unfortunately, he's tricked into marrying two. So let's first talk about this idea of polygamy, because we do see it a lot in the Bible, and it can be very, very confusing. But we have to know right off the bat, the Bible does not sanction polygamy at all. Since the beginning with Adam and Eve, it was always God's design for one man to be married to one woman for a lifetime. Like, that's the way God designed us. We see it in Genesis 2:24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Like, the Bible's clear on that since the beginning. But the problem is that we get really confused is because we see a lot of polygamy in the Bible. We see a lot of it in the Old Testament, and that can be very confusing to us. So, knowing that that's not God's intention, we have to go back to the beginning and say, okay, where did all this start? And I really think it began with sin. You know, after Adam and Eve sinned, then sin infected the whole world. And we see in Genesis 4:19, this is the first case of polygamy that we see. Verse 19 says, then Lamech took for himself 2 wives. See, that was unheard of back then. The name of one was Ada, the name of the second was Zillah. Now, it didn't take long for people to say, oh, wait a minute, I can do what I want to do. No one's going to tell me what to do. And so I would say polygamy, sin probably has a lot to do with it. But we've seen a lot of places in the Bible that actually Bible greats like David or Solomon, today we're going to see it with Jacob, had multiple wives. Now we can say, well, it was just a cultural thing. Well, maybe, but there really is actually no excuse for it. Especially because most people knew better, especially if you were a king. A lot of kings would take additional wives, and there would be military reasons for that. So it would be like, let's say you're a king, and the king of the United States, let's just say, and you have a daughter. So you take your daughter and marry her off to the king of Iran's daughter. Okay. Now, and what happens is, I know you're not going to bomb me. I know we're not going to bomb you because I have your daughter and you're not going to want to hurt your daughter. So you kind of see what's going on there. And so a lot of it was military reasons for it, so, you know, for protection for your country. But God was very, very specific about it when it came to kings. Deuteronomy 17 says this, neither shall he multiply wives for himself, talking about kings, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he greatly multiply silver and gold for himself. So God was pretty clear, and David and Solomon knew that they should not have multiple wives, but they disobeyed God, and it was clearly disobedience. And all we have to do is read the stories of these guys and what happened, and you're going to see right off the bat that there is an enormous amount of dysfunction because these men disobeyed God and married more women. We see it with King David. David had one son from one of his wives. This son rapes a daughter from another one of David's wives. Then we see one son from one wife murder a son from another wife. So there's a lot of problems. His house was an absolute disaster of a mess. And really, polygamy was a big reason for it. But here's the ultimate lesson is this. Our lives become a mess when we don't do what God says. It's real simple. God says, do this, live like this, and I can bless you. And when we go outside of those bounds, God's like, I can't bless that. I'm so sorry. So now back to polygamy. Sometimes a lot of polygamy happened because there was actually more women than men. The men would go off to war. A lot of them would die. And so what would happen is these women would be left if they're uneducated, they're poor, they have no one to take care of them, because back then it was either their husbands, their father, or their brothers that took care of them. Now, if you just wiped out your father, brother, and husband in a war, you're left destitute and you could become a prostitute. So a lot of men would take wives out of compassion, extra wives to take care of them, make sure they were taken care of. So that was a reason for a lot of it back then too. So always remember that when we see polygamy in the Bible, we don't read it like, oh, God's sanctioning this and he's thinking this is a good idea. It's not. We need to look at it when we read polygamy and say, wow, God is showing us what a mess people can make out of their lives when they disobey God. Because remember, our lives become a mess when we don't do what God says. So what we can learn from polygamy is this. It was never God's original design, ever. Okay? And then it always causes problems, as we're going to see today. And the problems are usually like bitterness and jealousy and anger and hurt. And like I said, today we'll see that in a big way with two women. So for Jacob, he really only falls in love once. And then he gets entangled in two marriages, like I said, not out of choice. He's tricked into one of them. But in reality, he's only ever loved one woman, and that would be Rachel. Now, for me trying to teach this, it's so hard to be in Genesis like this, because the biggest part for me, the hardest, most difficult part is this, is we look at it and we see how God used all this dysfunction. Because through this mess, the lineage of Jesus will come into play. The nation of Israel will come into play. And what's amazing about this story is that the lineage of Jesus does not come from the woman that Jacob truly loves. And that's what's so shocking about this whole thing. And what we realize as we read the Bible is that people are imperfect. They have sin. They have dysfunction. But God still can use that to further his story in the world. And some of you really need to hear that. Because you're like, God could never use me. That's not true. I did so many bad things. Okay, so did a lot of people in the Bible. But you need to hear that God can use your bad childhood, your stint in jail, your teenage pregnancy, your abortion, your alcoholism, whatever it is. God can use those things to further his story, just like we'll see today. And that's why I love the Bible. It is so incredibly honest. It's not about perfect people living perfect godly lives. We have seen mess after mess after mess. We have seen so far in Genesis murder. We've seen wickedness. We've got so bad that God floods the earth. We've seen Noah get drunk and naked. We see Abraham who lies to protect his life, and then he sleeps with his wife's maid to get a child. And honestly, picking up our story today, here's what I'll say. The chaos continues. It just does. Now, so far where we are is we've seen Isaac, which is the promised son of Abraham. Abraham and Sarah. So Abraham has two boys, one with Sarah, which is like God says, this is the promised son. The problem with Isaac is, of course, we've seen over the last few weeks that he has two boys, Esau and Jacob. Esau's the oldest. Isaac loves Esau the best. Unfortunately, Esau is godless. He wants nothing to do with God. He's married Canaanite women. Everything about Esau is bad, okay? But then you have the younger son, whose name is Jacob. He's never gotten married. He's always been at home. He's always been loyal. But Isaac wants to give the blessing, which is like pretty much irrevocable. He wants to give the blessing to his older son, his older son, Esau. And that's a problem because God has already told them before these children were even born that the blessing needs to go to the younger son, Jacob. Now, we know this in hindsight because through the lineage of the youngest son, Jacob, would come the blessing to this whole world, which is Jesus. So it had to come from Jacob. But Isaac's old and he's blind and he's going to do whatever he wants to do. And so he's about ready to give his blessing to his oldest godless son, Esau. But of course, thank the Lord, Rebecca hears this, the mom. She comes up with a plan to lie and deceive her husband, Isaac, into giving the blessing to the right son, which is Jacob. Now, because of all this, Jacob goes on the run. 400 miles away because after this whole blessing thing and Isaac gives the blessing to Jacob, even though, Esau's furious. And so Esau wants to kill his brother Jacob. And so Rebecca wants to save her son and save his life, understandably. And so she sends him away and never will see him again. But what we've come to learn over and over in Genesis is that lies and deception always have consequences. But what's so amazing to me is that God will use this entire mess to populate what we know as the 12 tribes of Israel. And like we say, always in this Bible study, God can make a message out of our messes. And we're going to see that in a big way today, starting with a love at first sight story. This made me laugh. Dan was a single guy living at home with his father, working in his family business. His father was very sickly and told Dan he was going to inherit the business and fortune, as soon as he died. But his father had one last wish. He's like, Dan, I need you to get married and settle down before I pass away. So one evening, Dan went to a financial planning seminar and he saw the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life before. She was bright and personable and Dan literally fell in love at first sight with this woman. So he told her, he said, you know what? I look pretty ordinary, but my father will probably die soon, and I'm going to inherit the family business and a very large fortune. Impressed, the woman asked Dan for his business card, and 3 weeks later, she became his stepmother. There you go. Love at first sight doesn't always win out. There you go. But all right, picking up our story from last week, Jacob is now on the run for his life. God showed up last week in the most amazing dream. If you didn't see last week's lesson, you got to go back and watch it. Where God told Jacob that he would come back and he would bless him with many descendants and this land would be his. And I think for Jacob, being, fearful of this trip he was on, he probably now felt really good about going on. So I always say with a bounce in his step and a promise from God, he just keeps walking these 400 miles. So we'll pick up our story in Genesis 29, verse 1. So Jacob went on his journey, came to the land of the people of the east, and he looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. So Jacob said to them, "My brethren, where are you from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." This is where Jacob's trying to get to. And then he said, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" And they said, "We know him." So he said, "Is he well?" And they said, "He's well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep." Then he said, "Look, it's high day. It's not time for the cattle. Is it not time for the cattle to be gathered together? Water the sheep and go and feed them." But they said, "We cannot do that. We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and we have rolled the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep." Now, I don't know why they put that in there. Maybe Jacob's trying to, sees Rachel is like, "Oh my gosh, I need to talk to her," and wants the other guys to be away. Maybe this is just some, something that they did in the area. Maybe it was a law in the area that you can't, get the well water out of the well until all the sheep and goats are there. I don't really know what the problem was. Verse 9, he says, "Now while he was speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother." And then he does something that seems very, very odd to us, okay? Verse 11 says this, "Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept." Okay, now we don't know why he does this because it seems like at this point he hasn't even told her who he was, it seems, and we haven't seen that in the scripture yet. And maybe this was just a cultural thing. Maybe, he was so excited, people greeted one another with a kiss. I don't think this was like a make-out kiss. Maybe he just kissed her on the cheek, we don't know, but he's weeping. And you're just like, what is that all about? And I think there could be a couple reasons. One could be that of relief. One could be that he just was so thankful and happy that he finally made it to his mother's brother's family. Okay, that could be one. He was overwhelmed and then started crying. The second one, this is kind of funny. Maybe he lacked testosterone. Okay? Now, the only reason why I say that is because a while back, okay, one of our sons called and said, "Mom, I've been really, really depressed lately, and I don't know why. It's not really like me. So I went to the doctor, and he tested me, and he said that I don't have enough testosterone in my body. So they said they're giving me shots, which is awesome. But he said they told me, now if you cry and you weep a lot, then that just means that we're not giving you enough testosterone. You'll have to come back." So I always thought, well, maybe Jacob just lacked testosterone. I don't know, because he's weeping and crying. But the third thing is maybe he was weeping because he saw Rebecca. I keep getting these two mixed up. Rachel. They need to have not ours as their name. Maybe he just saw Rachel and he knew instantly, love at first sight, that this is the girl of his dreams. Because remember, Jacob's in his 70s, all right, 77. And I always say back then I like to take their ages and cut it in half. So if that's true, maybe he's like a 45-year-old, I don't know. But Jacob had never married. He was kind of a mama's boy, most likely never dated because he did not want to take a wife from the Canaanite women. Thankfully, he wasn't supposed to. And so here he comes upon this beautiful, beautiful woman who is a relative of his. And remember, you can marry relatives back then. His dad, Isaac, married Rebekah. They were cousins once removed. So here is Rachel, a literal cousin of Jacob, standing in front of him. Now, we have no idea how old she is because the Bible never says, so we don't know. But he's never seen her before. Because think about it, people didn't travel back then. And Rachel was 400 miles away from her family. So they didn't have Facebook, they didn't have Instagram, they didn't have let me email you a picture of my fam, nothing like that. So nobody even knew what was going on with their relatives. So verse 12 says this, and Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Now her father's name was Laban, and we've seen him before. I'll put up this family tree right here, Abraham's family tree. So you see Abraham had a brother over there by the name of Haran. And then he had some kids. Milcah ended up married Bethuel, and then they had below that Rebekah and Laban. So you see Isaac, you see Rebekah and Laban, okay? And then the next generation, you see Jacob, and then you see Rachel, so you can kind of see that they're cousins. So if you think back on the story of Jacob's father, Isaac, and how he got a wife, remember Abraham lived 400 miles away. And so he traveled that 400 miles all the way to where Laban, Rebekah was, and Rebekah ended up going back with him the 400 miles to marry Isaac. So that's what this 400-mile journey did for her. And Laban was Jacob's mom, Rebekah's brother. So that kind of gives you the whole family tree. Now, here's the problem with Laban, or the brother. Laban is kind of a schemer. We'll see that later on, but he's a schemer and he's kind of a gold digger. And when he sent his sister away to marry Isaac, he was given a lot of money and gold and jewelry and stuff like that. So when he hears that his nephew, like Jacob, is here, he's probably like, cha-ching, ding, 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 ding. Dollar signs are probably coming up for him. But verse 13 says this, then it came to pass when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran out to meet him. He's probably hoping for lots of camel and gold again, and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all of these things. Now, he told him a lot of things most likely about what happened because he's there with nothing. He's like homeless. He has nothing. He's not with an entourage. He doesn't have camels or gold. Nothing is with him. And so Laban goes, he's probably in the back of his mind going, darn, that's ridiculous, but whatever. Verse 14 says this, and Laban said to him, surely you are you are my bone and my flesh. And so Jacob stays with him for a month. Now, I assume Jacob's helping out around the house, but verse 15 says this, then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? And now we're introduced to a second daughter. Her name is Leah. She's older. She's older than Rachel. Now, verse 16 says this. Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the elder was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. But there's a difference between these girls. Look at verse 17. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now, we don't know what that means, okay? Some people say Leah's eyes being delicate could mean maybe she was cross-eyed, maybe she had trouble seeing, she had to wear big, thick glasses, even though I don't think they probably had glasses back then. Maybe others think that it's just that maybe Rachel just had big brown eyes and they were very expressive, and maybe Leah had small slanty eyes and they weren't very expressive. I don't know. Maybe Leah lacked sparkle in her eyes. Like, nobody really knows the answer to that. But we do know the Bible seems to say that Rachel was stunning. It does not say that about Leah. So Jacob falls in love with Rachel instantly, like we said, the whole love at first sight thing. But in those days, if a man wanted to marry a woman, he would need to give the father a dowry or money or gifts or something. Like we saw when, Jacob's mom, Rebekah, Abraham's servant came, they had to give money and gifts to Laban and his family. But for Jacob, like I said, he has nothing. He's there with nothing. So he comes up with an idea. He wanted to marry Rachel, so he said he wants to work for him for 7 years. This will be like the dowry. And that payment would be to allow her to marry, to allow him to marry his daughter, Rachel. So here's kind of a cute, funny little joke. Speaking of marriage, I was listening to Jimmy Stewart tell this joke. Bob and Carla had been married 60 years. One night, Carla asked Bob if she would remarry if she died. And he couldn't believe that she asked this. He's like, that's ridiculous. I don't want to talk about this. But she wouldn't stop. So day after day, she kept asking him the same thing. If I died, would you remarry? So finally, he said, okay, yes. If you die, I would remarry. So Carla asks him, she said, well, would you sell the house? And he's like, well, no, I wouldn't sell the house. Would you get a new bed? No, I wouldn't get a new bed. Would you let your wife use my right-handed golf clubs? Bob says, yeah, you don't need to worry about that. She's left-handed. That's probably not what she wanted to hear, okay? But there you go, marriage. Welcome to marriage. Here's verse 18. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. So now fast forward 7 years. And Jacob's probably counting the days. Verse 21 says, then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. He's like in his 80s. He probably really wants to have sex at this particular point. So this is all like, let's go, chop, chop, let's get this going. So Laban puts on a feast. Now this was a custom that the father of the bride would hold a week-long feast where family and friends and neighbors, they'd all be invited. The marriage was consummated, and then there is this week-long celebration. So verse 22 says this, and Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. But then here comes the dysfunction and the deception. Verse 23 said this, now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. He takes Leah into Jacob to consummate the marriage. That's not who Jacob thinks he's marrying. That's not Rachel. But Laban gives Leah to Jacob to consummate the marriage, and Jacob has no idea, which begs so many questions like, where in the world is Rachel? Like, I think of this like a Cinderella story, like, did Laban lock her up so she couldn't do anything about this? Or did she know and just didn't tell Jacob? Like, maybe she knew that this was a cultural thing, that if that's true, she knew that the older had to get married first. But why didn't she tell Jacob this? Why didn't anyone tell Jacob this? And it's possibly because Laban didn't want to lose him. He was probably a great worker. And if he told him that he had to marry Leah first, then Jacob probably would have grabbed Rachel in the middle of the night and they would have headed 400 miles back home. And Laban didn't want to risk that. And maybe Laban just kept reassuring Rachel, like, Rachel, you know what's going on. We know Jacob loves you most, but I got to get your sister married off first. Like, we just don't know what that conversation was. Verse 24 says, and Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. She'll play a big part in this, so keep that name in the back of your brain. Verse 25, so it came to pass in the morning after they consummated their marriage, that behold, it was Leah, which begs even more questions. How would he not know this is not Rachel? Like, why would he not know that? And it could be a couple things. Rachel and Leah could have had the same body type. They could even have had the same voice. She most likely would have had a veil on. She could have worn Rachel's clothes, put on Rachel's perfume. It was dark. It's not like they had all these lights going on. There was a feast. Maybe Jacob drank too much. We don't know. But there it is. Jacob is now married unwittingly to a woman he does not love. But she had to have had a part in this. And what we come to realize through the story is that Leah seems to really love Jacob. And so when her dad came up with this brilliant, deceptive plan, she was probably like, yes, I get to marry the man of my dreams. She wants to get married. She wants to have babies. She loves Jacob. So in her mind, it's like, good idea, Daddy. But I'll bet you when Jacob woke up that morning, he had to have been furious. He had to have felt so incredibly deceived. But wait, I want you to think about this. He is getting a taste of what his oldest brother Esau must have felt like when Jacob lied and dressed up like Esau and stole his brother's blessing. Someone wrote this: the deceiver is deceived. The one who has pulled the wool over his father's eyes is flat out tricked. The weasel has been out-weaseled. The trickster has been tricked. Henry Morris wrote this, and it's kind of interesting. Isaac had thought Jacob was Esau, and so he gave him the blessing. Now Jacob had thought Leah was Rachel and had taken her for his wife. I read this somewhere. In both cases, the deception had been commanded by a parent. Think about that. This all happened because Laban said to do it. For Jacob, it happened because his mom, Rebecca, said to do it. The deception had been commanded by a parent. And in both cases, the purpose of the deception was to acquire something desperately desired. For Jacob, it was the blessing. For Laban, it would have been this, the marriage of his oldest daughter. Jacob had been sure the end justified the means in his case, but perhaps Leah and Laban also felt the same way in their case. Such consideration no doubt contributed to a lessening of Jacob's anger. He may even have recognized his situation as providential in view of the remarkably similar circumstances. Accordingly, so far as the record goes at least, he did not berate Leah for her part in the affair, none that we've ever seen in the Bible. It is not unlikely that his experience with her during the night had gendered a certain amount of love for her, in spite of her deception, especially as he suddenly realized that she had herself been in love with him all along. So Jacob wakes up, sees Leah, probably freaks out, goes to find the dad Laban, and he said to Laban, "What is this that you've done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me?" And so Laban makes his case. And Laban says, well, it must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Now, in a sense, this might have hit home to Jacob, maybe even a little payback. Because remember, he left home after deceiving his father, pretending to be the older when in fact he was the younger. This whole what goes around comes around thing kind of comes to mind. But sadly, and this is really sad, Jacob goes along with this. Why would he do that? He should have stopped this right then. So Laban says this in verse 27. Fulfill her week, have sex with her, come join the party, blah, blah, blah. And we will give you this other one also for the service, which you will serve for me still another 7 years. In other words, go along with this, okay, for the week, be Leah's husband for the next rest of these 7 days, and then I will give Rachel to you. But for that, you need to work for me another 7 years. Perfect. Now, my first thought was, poor Rachel, she's not going to get the wedding of her dreams, okay? Her older sister and dad kind of ruined that. But my second thought was how incredibly sad for Leah. Could you imagine being the first woman that Jacob ever has sex with, knowing all along, he's not thinking of you. He's thinking of your sister. He's thinking you are your sister. Like, that can't feel very good. If you were Leah, you would know while you're in bed with him how he feels about your sister. And yet for Leah, what we see is she just takes the scraps that are given to her. And maybe she thinks in her mind that Jacob is going to be honorable And he's going to just do this one woman thing that maybe he would just grow to love her. But not so fast. He loves Rachel. Jacob should have given Leah back to her dad, stood up for what's right, but now it's too late because there was a lot at stake. They had sex, and she could be pregnant. Verse 28 says this, "Then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife also. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid." Remember that name too. "Then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban still another 7 years." And then we move to why polygamy is so devastating and why it just destroys families. Verse 31, "When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren." I think this is so gracious of God because he did this for Leah. And I actually found myself, when I was done with this lesson, actually feeling so much more compassion for Leah than I did for Rachel. Leah was kind of like the underdog. Her sister Rachel was more beautiful. Probably all the guys looked at her all the time. Jacob went after the more beautiful one. But what is so amazing about this entire story is that God will use Leah and her kids in the history of Israel way more than he does with Rachel. It will be Leah's kids, through Leah's children, that the Levite priest will come into play. It will be through Leah's children, one child in particular, Judah, that the lineage of Jesus himself will come. Not Rachel, the one he loves. I don't know. We don't know really much about Rachel. I say maybe Rachel was just a snob, okay? Who knows? Maybe she was just used to getting all the attention. Maybe she was just mean to Leah. Like, we just don't know. But God uses this whole mess to do something that needed to be done, which was build the nation of Israel. Remember all the way back in Abraham, God told Abraham that his descendants would be as many as the stars. But there was a pretty slow start to this. Abraham has Isaac, okay. Isaac has 2 kids. One of them was off the rails. One was okay. Not a great start to building this nation as many as the stars. So it feels so weird in this particular lesson that God is going to build a nation this way through multiple wives and jealousy and dysfunction. But it dawned on me as I was putting this lesson together that it didn't have to be this way. Everyone could have done this the right way, where there was no polygamy, no dysfunction, no jealousy. What if Jacob had gone to Laban and said, I'm not going to stay married to Leah. I'm not having sex with her. We're not doing that. I will be married to Rachel herself. And then that would open up this door for God to bless Rachel and give her, let's say, 6 children. Okay? And then maybe Rachel dies. But because Leah's been there and all that, then maybe, Jacob ends up marrying Leah and then they have 6 more children. Think about that. God could have done that if they all had made the right decisions along the way, but they didn't. And it was just a reminder that God deals with us human beings all the time, that we just disregard his best for us. And we see this with Jacob. He didn't stand up for what was right. But I always go back to thinking it didn't have to be that way. So apparently Jacob is like the sex machine for these women. Leah keeps getting pregnant. So Jacob does honor his wedding vows to her. Rachel, the one he truly, truly loves, is barren. She can't get pregnant. That's not going to cause any problems in this family, is it? Watch this, verse 32. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Just heartbreaking to me. What we see is, but the one good part about this is that Leah seems to add the Lord into this whole mess. Rachel doesn't seem to do that, but Leah does. Leah always understands that God is behind her blessing of children. And I think she really thought that Jacob would love her. But he actually never did, not the way he loved Rachel. But he kept having sex with her, so she kept talking him into it. Verse 33, then she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, she always takes it back to the Lord, he has therefore given me this son also, and they called his name Simeon. Once again, thank you, God. Verse 34, she conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name is called Levi. Through this son, we'll see when Moses comes, on the scene, that, the Levite priests, the Levites, this is the son that lineage comes through. But the saddest part about that is that with each one of these kids, the goal was not so much to raise these kids to love God. Her goal was to get her husband to love her more than her sister. And it just made me sad for all the kids that were born to Leah. Because here you have a mom having children as a game, using her children as pawns, all because she wants this one man to love her. We never hear from her how they need to love God and serve him. She doesn't seem to do that, because these kids, as we'll see later on in Genesis, are going to be a disaster. Okay, so just so you know that. I was thinking about this isn't going to happen with Cheyenne's little daughter, Susie. Susie's 5 months old. Okay, and this is the cutest picture. I'll have to put this up right here. And this is Brad. Okay, and he's reading to Susie, who's 5, the ABCs of Bible history. Okay, they have a kid's book, so he's reading that. And see, this is the household that Cheyenne and Brad are raising up their children to know God, to love him, even at 5 months old. Cheyenne put the caption, Dad and Suze were reading about the ABCs of Bible history this morning. Praise God for this man and his love for the Lord. But that's just something that Leah just never did. And with each child, Leah did recognize that God opened her womb, thanked him, praised him, gave him all the glory. But beyond that, that's all. She never taught her children anything else. Now, verse 35 says this. Then she conceived again and bore a son and said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing. Now, this is what is my point today, is that God can use anything, dysfunction or not, because he uses this son and this crazy situation as the lineage for Jesus. We'll go all the way to the Matthew chapter 1. The first part is a genealogy of Jesus. Look at this. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. And that was the lineage of Jesus. So Leah has 4 boys now, convinced that Jacob's going to love her. Rachel, on the other hand, is devastated and jealous, and she wants a baby. Okay, I don't know where Jacob's brain was at this point. Does he love all this attention with all these women? I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. Maybe the whole monogamy thing, one woman should have looked a little bit better to him than it probably did. I thought this was cute. Uncle Elmer and Aunt Effie were playing a word game with some friends from church. The idea of the game is that you give a definition and someone gives the answer. It's a really simple game. So Uncle Elmer and Aunt Effie only needed one answer to win, and this was the definition: the state or custom of being married to only one person at a time. Uncle Elmer got excited. He's like, I got this for the wind. And Effie held his hand up lovingly and he said boldly, monotony. He should have said monogamy, but he said monotony. And Aunt Effie says that he slept in the truck that night. But monogamy, whatever, okay? None of that was really happening with Jacob. Genesis chapter 30, verse 1. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel what? Envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I'm going to die. She reminds me of Esau, our drama queen, okay? Give me some soup or I'm going to die. No, you're not going to die. So Jacob communicated this loud and clear to Rachel. Look at verse 2. Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" In other words, are you serious? Like, what can I do about it? I can have sex with you every single day, Rachel. I can't open your womb. I can't give you a baby. That's God's deal, not mine. So Rachel comes up with this horrible, horrible idea, reminiscent of what Grandma Sarah did. I assume Jacob knew the story and history of Abraham and Sarah. I'm sure that was passed down. When Sarah gave her maid to Abraham, and she had a son, Ishmael, okay? And we see the effects of that today because through Ishmael came the Arab nation, through Isaac came the Jewish nation. They're at war to this day until the end times. That was a bad deal, a very bad decision. You don't give your maid to your husband to sleep with. But Rachel was pretty sure that nothing bad was going to happen to her, because that's what we always think. Verse 3, so she said, "Here's my maid, Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees so that I may have children by her." So she's hoping Bilhah's going to go have a baby. She's going to give me the baby. I'm going to raise the baby. Woohoo, I get a baby, okay? So verse 4, then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, and Jacob went into her. I'm just like, Jacob, what is wrong with you? Apparently he just listens to these women and they tell him what to do and he just does it. He should have stopped this a long time ago. So he has sex with the maid. Jacob is kind of like the sex machine, apparently. He's in his 80s, for crying out loud. Verse 5, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again. So she's like, go sleep with him again. And bore Jacob a second son. Verse 8, then Rachel said, with great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. It's just shocking, this whole thing. It's all about winning the baby war with her sister. So anyone who thinks polygamy is a good thing, this should cure you of that, okay? But now Leah's going to get involved. She doesn't want her sister to win this baby war. So she does what Rachel does, and she gives her maid to Jacob so she can have another baby. Verse 9, when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as wife. How many wives is Jacob going to have now? Verse 10, and Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, a troop comes, so she called his name Gad. Then Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed, so she called his name Asher. This is like the Israeli version of sister wives. Like it's insanity. But what we see is what's going on in the heart of these women with this ridiculous scene where we meet Leah's firstborn. By this time, he's probably around maybe 6, 7, 8, no one really knows. His name was Reuben. We see him in verse 14. Now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Now, a mandrake was thought to be an aphrodisiac and an aid to fertility, okay? Here's a picture of one so you can kind of see what it looks like. The Arabs called this the devil's apples, and the Greeks nicknamed it love apple because of its legendary reputation as an aphrodisiac. Mandrakes are part of Shakespeare plays where they are given mystical or occultic powers. So, right off the bat, they should have known that's not really what a mandrake does. But Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. Rachel knows better. She should know better. This chapter is so difficult to read because she knows that God alone opens wombs, not a mandrake, okay? But she bought into this. She's so incredibly desperate to have a baby that she resorts to this superstition. And I was reading that, I thought, you know, how sad for them, but then I thought, people do that today. How many Christians today are superstitious, like believing mandrakes will get you pregnant? Or believing if you put that cross on your mirror, you're never going to get in a car accident. Or maybe burying that little statue in your yard will protect you. Or putting that rabbit's, foot on your keychain is going to keep you safe. Or, knock on wood, we're going to knock on wood, like that's going to do anything. Like nowadays, it's crystals. Christians are buying into this whole crystal thing. I read this for centuries. Crystals have been used in homes to what? Ward off negative feelings, or you could just pray, encourage prosperity, improve sleep, and create harmony. Even the most common crystals on the market work on a vibrational level and have the ability to heal, protect, and transmute energy. Your home is where you unwind and connect with loved ones, and crystals can help ensure your space remains both cozy and safe. And we see Christians are embracing this superstitious activity. So here's what superstition is. Superstition is based on the ignorant faith of an object having magical powers. It's like, I am going to be this way because of that object. Not because of God, but because of that object. In other words, you believe that the crystal or the cross or the beads or the St. Christopher or the knocking on wood has some sort of power. And yet the Bible says that is idolatry. You're placing your faith, you're placing your trust in an inanimate object, not God himself or the power of the Holy Spirit living within you. The Bible does not support the idea of things occurring by chance because you have a crystal rock in your house. As a Christian, we know nothing that happens in our life is outside of God's control. He either causes or allows things keeping with his divine plan. But you can't say, that's happening because I have this crystal in the house, or I have the cross on, or I have whatever it is, an inanimate object. Now, crystals are beautiful. They're beautiful rocks created by God. And if you have them sitting in your home because they are beautiful, and you're like, God is so awesome, look at that, then yay. But if you have them there because you're like, that crystal is going to give me what I need, that's a serious problem as a follower of Christ. Don't let anything that feels superstitious distract you from Jesus alone or the power of God alone. But Rachel moves to superstition. She embraces this cultural superstitions over trusting God himself. She trusts her mandrake charms instead of God. But look how pathetic this is in verse 15. But she said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Leah's saying this. Is it a small matter that you would take away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? Do you think there's a lot of pent-up anger in these girls? Leah is still hanging on to the fact that Jacob loves Rachel more, even though Leah knew this going into the marriage. She blames Rachel for Jacob not loving her. But Rachel has an idea. She really wants these mandrakes. She really is convinced this is what's going to help her get pregnant. So Rachel said, therefore, he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. She just bargained her husband having sex with her to get the mandrakes. It's the craziest story. You're like, what? It feels like we're watching like a live poker game or something. You're giving your husband to your sister to have sex with so you can have a mandrake. It's madness. So apparently Rachel's the one who keeps the Jacob sex calendar, okay? Verse 16, when Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me, for I surely have hired you with my son's mandrakes. And Jacob just goes along with it. Look at that. And he lay with her that night. Really, Jacob? I'm just like, this man has no backbone whatsoever. Everything about this is wrong. Verse 17, and God listened to Leah. God still uses all this craziness. God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. And what we see is weird because Leah seems to be a praying woman, but she's doing everything backwards, and it just feels odd that God is doing something with this crazy scenario. Verse 18, Leah said, God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Now, isn't it interesting that after this mandrake incident, you assume that it's a one and done thing with Leah, like one time only, and it's not. I mean, Jacob keeps having sex with Leah and the maid, apparently. And so he must have had some kind of feelings for her. I don't really understand it. It seems crazy. And the question is, why would God keep blessing Leah with children? And the answer is this: because God had a plan. And in hindsight, you and I can read the Bible in Genesis and see the big picture. God was doing something through these women's dysfunction, okay? And he was building the nation of Israel. And he was using these two competitive women to get this done. We see Ruth talks about this when Ruth was given to Boaz. Ruth 4:11 says this when they were at the gate. All the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses, okay? The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah." So this is before Ruth goes into Boaz. But they're witnessing this and they're saying, okay, this is going to be a good marriage. And they're praying about this with Ruth. They're saying, the Lord make the woman Ruth who is coming to your house like who? Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. Each one of these sons would become a part of the 12 tribes of Israel. Once they eventually get into the land with Moses, each one of these children's children will get a piece of this land that you and I know as Israel. Here is a map of this. You can see these kids' names: Simeon, Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, all of these names. Those are their pieces of land that they're going to get. Now, at this point in the story, there's only 10 sons, okay? But look what finally happens to complete the 12 tribes. Verse 22, then God remembered Rachel. It's a little late, God, but God is never late. He waited until those 10 were born because he knows that God knew if Rachel had a son, had a baby of any sort, that Jacob would always love that child more. So we waited until all 10 of these boys were born first. And then he remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. Verse 23, she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. And the Lord did add another son to Rachel, and his name was Benjamin. But as we close out today, and we close out this crazy scene, here's a thought. Why would God do this with Leah? And I wonder if it's because Jacob married Leah first. And you're like, well, he didn't mean to. Good or bad? Good or bad? It's almost as if God honored that marriage over all of them. Leah got the majority of children. Rachel will eventually die in childbirth with her second son, Benjamin. Leah will go on to be the wife of Jacob until she dies. Leah is the one that's buried alongside of Jacob, Abraham, and Sarah. We see this in Genesis 49:30. In the cave that is the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite as a possession for a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. Isn't that amazing? It's just a reminder as we close out today of this, that sometimes God's plans completely differ from ours. Why, if Jacob loved Rachel, wouldn't God just give all the kids to Rachel? And I don't know the answer to that. Maybe it was a consequence for how he stole his older brother's birthright and blessing. Maybe that was a problem for God. Maybe this was a consequence for not respecting the eldest of the family and their God-given birthright. Maybe this was a consequence for just not letting God handle Jacob's problems instead of, deceiving his father and doing all of those things. But when it's all said and done, God would use Leah, the oldest, the firstborn daughter, the one he married without even knowing it. And she wasn't even the love of Jacob's life. Here's my thought. God's ways are mysterious to us a lot of times. And this is one of these stories that you just shake your head and you're like, what just happened? But God uses things in our life that just don't make sense to further his story. For some of you, it could be the loss of someone you love. It could be the loss of a job, the loss of money, the husband who left you, the child who went to jail, the child who died. I don't know. But I do know that God always has a bigger plan. And a lot of times we're not going to see that plan this side of heaven. So when something happens in your life that you just don't understand, it's a good time to just sit back and say, God, I'm going to trust you with what I don't understand. In this section, I don't understand why it happened this way. But God does, and I'm just going to be like, all right, God, you know what's going on. I don't. I'm going with it. But that's what we're going to have to do, is learn how to trust God with things, even though we don't understand. Have a really good day.